Hannah Bardell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. When we are elected to this place, I think it's fair to say that we have our own ideas and ambitions about what we want to campaign on. So often, however, we are guided by the real-life experiences of our constituents, and that is what brings me here today. A debate on deaths abroad in suspicious circumstances, particularly in relation to two of my constituents and their families, Judy Pearson and Kirstie Maxwell. I am honoured and privileged to get a chance today to tell their stories. Some of them, and some of the details, are very harrowing and distressing. Judy Pearson and Kirstie Maxwell were two young, beautiful and vivacious young women taken from their families when they still had their whole lives ahead of them. Two bereaved families, two innocent women killed in suspicious and unexplained circumstances abroad, both at the hands of, we believe, violent men. And in both cases, the alleged perpetrators of the crimes are walking free, with very little having happened in terms of investigations into their deaths. And I want to put on record, Madam Deputy Speaker, the admiration and respect that I have for staff who work in the Foreign Service, for the very difficult job that they have to do, often in the most challenging and dangerous circumstances. I'll give way.
Honourable Speaker, I sought permission from the Honourable Lady to give way because the Honourable Lady is bringing an issue that has touched my constituency as well, and just in May of last year before the election. I just want to put on record my thanks to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office for working hard over the weekend to enable the young body's body to come home, and also at a very, very difficult time, not only for the mum and dad who were in Northern Ireland and he was in Spain. I want to commend the Honourable Lady for bringing it forward, because really those of us who have been through that with their constituents know just how heartbreaking it is. But when you've got staff that work hard and do the business as our Foreign Commonwealth Office staff do, we have to put it on record and say thank you.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his intervention. As someone who worked in a foreign consulate, I worked for the American State Department in their consulate in Edinburgh. I know firsthand how difficult the job of consular staff is. I've sat in on calls with senior officers when they had to break the news of loved ones, the death of a loved one. However, it is my belief that, having spent a lot of time with both Kirstie and Julie's families, that much, much more can be done by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to resource and support their staff to help families such as Julie and Kirstie's when their loved ones die abroad in suspicious circumstances. Julie was 38. She was learning Hebrew to get citizenship in Israel because her dad was Jewish. She went to Israel to live and work and immerse herself in the local culture. Her Aunt Deborah, who's my constituent, talked of how Julie loved the heat, she loved to sing karaoke, and she was really fun-loving. On the 26th of November 2015, Julie was badly beaten by her ex-boyfriend. The police were called and attended, but she was never offered medical treatment or admitted to hospital. The following day, on the 27th of November, Julie was found dead in her hostel room in Eilat, Israel. Following Julie's death, and largely because of erroneous and inaccurate claims that were made by the authorities in Israel, her family took the hugely brave step of releasing photographs of Julie's badly beaten and bruised body. Those images are deeply distressing. But the family felt they had no choice, because the autopsy report, which the family believe is deeply flawed, claimed that Julie had died of natural causes. The bruising and damage to Julie's beautiful face, in my view, tells a very different story. If you'd just let me make some more progress, I'd be very grateful, and then I'll take interventions. Julie is survived by her parents and her Aunt Deborah, who I can say is one of the most determined, fearless and inspiring women that I have ever met. In her own words, "My family will continue to fight for justice for Julie. We'd hate for any other family to go through what we have gone through. The FCO promised in 2014 there'd be processes in place for suspicious deaths abroad, yet our family had to fight every step of the way for help and advice, even after requesting freedom of information. Instead of the promised 20-day response, I had to pursue every 21 days and eventually received it after 5 months. I asked the Foreign Office, when will they listen to what families need? Why did it take so long for basic information to be relayed to me? Why are families still being let down with lack of help and support?" Madam Deputy Speaker, just over a year later, I found myself dealing, if he just gives me a moment, with another tragic case of Kirstie Maxwell. Kirstie was 27 years old, newly married to husband Adam, and was on holiday in Benidorm, Spain with friends. On the 29th of April 2017, Kirstie fell to her death from a balcony on the 10th floor of a block of apartments where she'd been staying. The family are still struggling to get full details, largely because the Spanish police failed to interview key witnesses and initiate major crime scene protocols and procedures. But what we do know is the room she fell from was not her own. However, due to apparent flawed investigation, the reason she was in that room is not known. The room she entered was occupied by a group of English men who were high on drugs and alcohol, and the circumstances which ensued may have been fuelled by the men's use of drugs and the case of mistaken identity by the men in the room. The Spanish police report, Spanish media reporting and some crime scene examinations indicated that Kirstie tried to escape, possibly in fear of her life. Adam sent me a poem that he read out at Kirstie's funeral, which I won't read here, but it gives the view of a warm, funny, loving young woman who'd just been promoted at work and loved her family, her husband and her pug dog with all her heart. I've spent quite a significant amount of time with Kirstie's husband Adam and her parents Brian and Denise. They too are some of the bravest folk that I've had the privilege of meeting, and they have worked tirelessly to get answers, along with the independent reviewer David Swindle. It's impossible to put into words the depths of their devastation and sorrow, but they provided me with the following words. Mentally, emotionally and physically, this has been extremely tough and still with no real end in sight. When Kirstie was brutally taken from us, they took a part of us all, something we will never regain. Kirstie was visiting an EU country as a British citizen. She lived by the rules set out in today's society. She worked every day, paid her taxes, and never called on the system for any assistance. We now plead for that assistance, plead for justice to be sought, plead for her country not to desert her and her family in their hour of need. She needs this help more than ever, needs more than lip service to be done, needs more support for Scottish and UK families who lose a loved one abroad in suspicious circumstances. The past 10 months as a family, we have felt lost, confused and abandoned. Lost at the lack of direction and compassion we were shown from the authorities, confused at the revolving door of dysfunctional protocol and procedures which are not in place, displaced and misunderstood, and abandoned by a legal system not understood, not relevant and not fit for purpose of protecting victims of suspicious deaths and murders abroad. This and trying to grieve while fighting a case through the Spanish courts with no assistance financially, legally or morally from either the UK or Spain. We hope that this cross-party group of MPs, which, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope to set up in the very near future, can get together to produce a procedure that can offer their constituents assistance, support and a means of gaining justice for any suspicious death abroad of a loved one. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Very grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way, and I apologise for interrupting her when she was making such a powerful and emotional speech, but it was at a point that reminded me of my constituent, Mrs Brenda White, who lost her son Michael tragically in Thailand, and she was told that it was suicide, but she simply didn't believe that, and much of the evidence didn't really support that. And what I would like to agree with the Honourable Lady is that although the Foreign Office, we know, do a great job under some very trying circumstances, you and the Honourable Lady, myself and others are giving examples of where the Foreign Office has fallen short for our constituents who feel that they should have had much more support when their loved ones were so tragically taken from them.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his intervention, and my thoughts and prayers are with his constituents. Madam Deputy...
Order. It being 7 o'clock, we have to move the adjournment.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
Question is, this House do now adjourn. Hannah Bardell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What can we say to those families, to our constituents, other than we need to resolve right here, right now, that we cannot and we will not let any more families down?
Would my honourable friend give?
I'll be happy to give.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend and congratulate them on allowing me to intervene. Since 2015, 3 families in my constituency, that of Caroline Hope from Clydebank, whose family had to allow her to come home and raise funds for her to die. Also that of Lisa Brown, who has been missing in Spain for 2.5 years, and that of Jagtar Singh Johal, who is in detention in India without charge for another 4 months, have had to go through a range of maze of bureaucracy through the process. Yeah. Does my honourable friend agree that it is now time for consideration of a legislative framework for consular support due to its complexity and not just an ad hoc policy approach as we've seen for a long time? And that is no detriment, of course, to the staff of the FCO who do a commendable job.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention and absolutely agree. It is about having the most robust framework possible and giving the tools and the resource to those officers in the Foreign Service to do the best job that they can. I'm happy to give over.
I thank my honourable member for giving way. Like everyone else, I've got a young man killed, murdered in Spain, Craig Mallon, in 2012. Now, this case could be resolved if we had more information. So I would like to work along with the member in making sure, work with the Foreign Office, that the police have to work with us. They've got information withheld, 6 years on. This family's distraught and we need more information, and I'm willing to work with the member onto the Craig Mallon case. Thank you very much, Finlay.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments, and I look forward to working with him. I'm aware of the case of Craig Mallon, and my thoughts and prayers are with them also. And you know, the experience that the families that I have supported have had is that at times the communication has been disjointed and difficult to interact with officers. In the case of Kirstie's family, Adam, her husband, received a call from the Spanish police to say that Kirstie was dead. Adam told me that he thought initially that it was a prank call and asked whether it begs the question of whether there should be clearer protocols for the family members being informed of a death by the FCO. Judy Pearson's family learned of Julie's death through informal channels, and it was actually Julie's aunt Deborah who brought the news of Julie's death to the attention of the FCO. Deborah told me recently that the consulate denied also having ever received a letter from myself or correspondence from Deborah about getting Julie's personal belongings back. I have that letter and I know that I sent it. And more than 2 years on, Julie's personal effects have just been passed to her family. It's a very basic thing, but having the personal effects of your loved one back is so vitally important, and I'm happy to give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the honourable lady for giving way and also for bringing this most important debate forward. On that particular point, I raised in this very House last summer the case of Kirstie Jones, a constituent of mine who, Sue and Glyn, her parents, received a phone call from the Foreign Office to say that her daughter had been tragically murdered. Kirstie had been tragically murdered in Thailand. This was 18 years ago. And now, when Thailand closed their cases at 20 years, now the family are trying to get those belongings of Kirstie's back into this country. DNA has improved, and they are trying to get those tests done, and our local police force have to now send another international letter of request to get those belongings back over here for this final assessment and analysis. It is wrong. It is the process, it's not our Foreign Commonwealth Office. I think it's the process internationally that is wrong, and we have to change this.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention and absolutely agree. I think there is much more that can be done on the global stage around these issues, particularly when they're cross-jurisdiction and when families are having to deal with a legal system that is alien to them. And whilst I appreciate that much of the issues that we raise may have been outside of the power of the FCO, it is interesting to note that in 2014 the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee published its 5th report into support for British nationals abroad, the consular services, and I quote from that report. In cases of deaths abroad, we receive substantial anecdotal evidence to indicate that FCO services to bereaved families are inconsistent and have at times fallen well below the expected standards of the FCO, with repeated failures of communication and compassion. We welcome the FCO's ongoing review of how it provides services in cases of suspicious deaths abroad and give our support for a proposal for a specialised central unit to provide expert and dependable assistance. In Kirstie Maxwell's case, I'll be happy to give way.
I thank the honourable lady for giving way, and I thank you very much for bringing this important debate forward. One of the issues that you've raised that's been common across the chamber is the series of unanswered questions that families have to experience Would she also agree with me that one of the issues that is also of concern is a lack of pastoral care and support for families who go abroad? Like in my constituents, 2 of my constituents have lost their son abroad, and when they went out to the European country, the EU member country where he was killed or where he died, they were given no police contact, no pastoral support, completely abandoned in their grief and isolated in a country in which they didn't speak the language. And this really isn't good enough. And people don't just need help with the legal process, they also need the support that they need in their time of grief.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention and absolutely agree. It's very often about taking a lead, and some of the language in the Foreign Office guidance is very conditional. I'll come on to that, because in Kirstie Maxwell's case, the fact that it took me from writing to the FCO first in October 2017 to getting a contact name in February 2018 was not the sort of compassion that I found acceptable. Today, I'm still unclear about the remit and power of the murder-manslaughter unit, and I also don't know why they cannot become involved when a criminal investigation is ongoing. Perhaps that is something the Minister can shed some light on. Similarly, we've been chasing the whereabouts of the clothes that were on Kirstie's body when she died, and only found out very recently that these key pieces of evidence have been destroyed by the Spanish authorities. A matter that I believe that the FCO should be raising at the highest possible level. And I do appreciate that at times these are diplomatic issues. These are matters that have to be raised and pushed by the government or by a minister. But it's absolutely vital that that flow of communication is as clear and defined as possible. Because the report that I referred to before goes on to highlight the use of language and the fact that support is discretionary. It says, we will consider making appropriate representations to local authorities if there are concerns that the investigation has not been carried out in line with local procedures. Where possible, if you visit the country during the early stages of the investigation and initial court hearings related to the death, our staff there may be able to meet you. Where legal systems differ significantly from the UK or proceedings are conducted in a language you don't understand, we may help to arrange or attend an initial round of meetings with the authorities. The language, Madam Deputy Speaker, for me is too discretionary, it's way too conditional. It needs to be more robust and more definite.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving me. She's certainly giving a very powerful and moving speech. I provided with some details of what happened to constituents of mine, not a suspicious death, but very much a sudden death of an elderly constituent on holiday with his family. I have to say, in that sort of instance, the local embassy failed that family very badly. The advice they got consisted of an email with a link to a 28-page document that they were supposed to read in the hours when they were still trying to come to terms with the fact that the lady had lost her husband, the rest of them had lost a father and a father-in-law. The family were at the departure gate waiting for what would have been a very, very difficult flight home when they got a phone call saying they were responsible for finding a Spanish qualified lawyer who spoke English. Later they were told out of the blue to find £2,000 to have documents translated between Spanish and English. Nobody told them at the time that when their dad was brought home there would need to be another post-mortem. Somewhere along the line the authorities lost his passport and death certificate. The insurance company and insurance broker, I think, are still arguing between themselves as to who should be funding the additional costs. Not all of that is down to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, but would my honourable friend agree that a first step would be to make sure that one person in the specific embassy or consulate is attached to the grieving family and is responsible for fixing and sorting out whatever needs to be sorted out, so that the family are not having to argue with undertakers, with lawyers and insurance companies at a time when, in this case, all they wanted to do was get their dad home for a burial?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and he raises some very pertinent and important points, and whilst I appreciate that some of that is outside the remit of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, I think it is a wider issue of insurance companies, which my constituents have struggled with, of the protocols and procedures and legal assistance. In the case of Kirstie's family, they arrived in Spain. They were given very little support, unfortunately, initially, and they were given a list of English-speaking lawyers. No indication whether any of them had any expertise in homicide, and that has been very, very challenging. So I would like to know what more the FCO... Yep, I'll be happy to give way to them, gentlemen.
I thank my honourable friend for Livingston for giving way and for securing this debate, and also for the proposed APPG on deaths abroad, which I've said I will help her on. She refers to poor local police performance, and that's certainly the case of Michael Porter, whose mother from Dumfries died in suspicious circumstances in March 2009 on the island of Crete. And it was over a year later that the police decided that it was murder. Since then, very little has happened, and Michael Porter's still fighting for justice for his mother. And actually, I hope the Minister will meet with Michael Porter at some point. And I hope that this APPG you're performing and you're planning and the adjournment debate you brought this evening will help the many people who are in this dreadful situation.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and I look forward to very much working cross-party on this issue, because I think it is an issue that transcends party political boundaries and something that we can all work constructively on to support and bring about change. And I think we want to know what more the FCO can do to assure people like Julie and Kirstie's family that where the police investigation isn't being properly executed, that they will try and make representations. They will make representations and put pressure on the authorities to properly investigate, or indeed invite the police from the nations of the UK to help, as was rightly done, as we all remember, in the case of Madeleine McCann. Now, no one expects them to promise to fix it, but more attempts can be made. And I feel very strongly that not enough has changed since this report, as do the families I represent. We've heard of many other cases from constituents, and I know that my honourable friend, the member for Glasgow North, has a constituent, Julie Love, who's done a huge amount of work on this issue following the death of her son Colin, who died in a swimming accident in Venezuela. She successfully campaigned to have the law changed in Scotland on FAIs. Madam Deputy Speaker, the correspondence with the government on both of my constituency cases have uncovered some concerning points, but I see my honourable friend looking to intervene.
I thank the honourable friend for giving way. She's been incredibly generous with her time. I also pay tribute to the amazing work of Julie Love and the determination with which she fought for that change in law, and indeed our former colleague Anne McLaughlin, who helped her with that, and Bob Doris, the local MSP. But in all of this, I think the point she's making about the need for the FCO to really listen carefully and respond, because very often the expectations people have of what is, after all, their government's representation in these foreign countries very often does not match the experiences. And I've also dealt with constituents who luckily have been alive, have survived terrorist attacks, and also found that the service that they've received from the FCO very much hasn't matched their expectations. So I wish her all the best with what she's taking forward.
I thank my honourable friend, and I think it's testament to the police services in Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland that they do have the highest standards. And I know from having spoken to a very senior police officer in Scotland the level of support that families of foreign nationals who die, certainly in Scotland, get. She spoke to me about how they took the family of a loved one who'd been killed in a road traffic accident to the site, how they'd given support every step of the way. And rightly, our citizens expect a high level of service, because they get a high level of service across the UK. But some of my correspondence I want to refer to. On the 11th of August 2016, in a response to my letter about Judy Pearson, the Minister, Tobias Elwood, the honourable member for whose constituency I forget, I do have not, but the Minister who was in place at the time said, the FCO does not translate formal documents because this type of support is best provided by independent professionals, and we do not have the funding and expertise to provide such specialist services. The FCO also does not pay legal costs and could not contribute towards any case Ms Pearson's family may wish to initiate in Israel. And I understand that's a very fair point, but it does beg the question of translation services and what more can be done in that regard. And on the 7th of February 2017, in my response to a letter to the Prime Minister, she said, "I fully understand why you believe improvements can be made by the way in which the government provides support to relatives of British nationals who die abroad. The government has a responsibility to help them through the subsequent process with clarity and compassion." Madam Deputy Speaker, even the Prime Minister recognises that there are flaws and issues with the support and processes that the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, when dealing with deaths abroad in suspicious circumstances, gives. And I wonder if the Minister would like to take the opportunity to apologise to the families who have been let down. Myself and other campaigners and members on this issue have been inundated with stories and experience of families of British citizens who've died in difficult and distressing experiences abroad. And as I said at the beginning of the debate, I have the highest regard for the Minister, for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, for the consular profession and the work that they do in some of the hardest and toughest circumstances. But it's very clear to me from the experiences of Kirstie and Julie's family that they deserve better. And the families and constituents of members across this House need to make sure that there is a review of support and proper action to make sure that the processes and protocols are absolutely the best that families can expect. So in memory of those who have died, and to protect and prevent future distress, I plead with the Minister. Let's work together to help the families that are suffering now, to change the system. We owe it to them, we owe it to their memory to make sure that the services that are offered abroad to our citizens is the very best that it can be, and that they get, where possible, proper investigations into their deaths and answers and justice.
Minister Harry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I start by congratulating the Honourable Lady for securing this debate and for the very sensitive way in which she put her case and those of her constituents, and for the very constructive way in which she's approaching her engagement with us on this issue. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, every year from this country, 70 million Britons travel abroad. And last year, tragically, 3,912 British citizens died overseas, and 74 of those were identified as cases of murder and manslaughter. The death of a loved one, Madam Deputy Speaker, in any circumstances is distressing. But when it happens far from home, where the culture or the practices are unfamiliar, and particularly when the cause of death is unclear, it can be especially traumatic. So my thoughts go out to all those who have been mentioned in today's debate, all those who have lost loved ones, and I offer my deepest condolences in particular to the families of Judy Pearson and Kirstie Maxwell, about whom the Honourable Lady has spoken so movingly this evening. Sadly, British nationals do tragically die overseas, and our global network of 772 consular staff are there to be contacted in these situations. And I am glad, Madam Deputy Speaker, to add my tributes to the work that they do out in the field. We heard that echoed by the member for Strangford and from other members. Whenever the death of a British national is reported to us, our consular officials, both in London and in our posts overseas, do everything they can to support the relatives. They explain to them what they need to do under the local system. For example, it can be the procedure for getting a death certificate, how to find out whether a post-mortem will be carried out, and whether or not there will be an investigation into the death. They also provide details of local lawyers, local translators, or organisations that can provide specialist help. However, as we try to make clear in our travel advice, we cannot ourselves provide legal advice or translation services. We must also respect the other country's legal systems and cannot interfere in their processes, just as they could not interfere in ours. I will give way. I think we've got a little bit of time.
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady, and I'm also grateful for her initial comments. But does she recognise that it is only fair and appropriate for, the government of the UK and for the authorities to press where processes and procedures are not being followed? In the case of my constituent Kirstie Maxwell, Spain has a Victims' Bill of Rights, which, as far as I can see, is not being respected. The rights of the victim and the family are not being respected. It is only appropriate to intervene and put pressure on to hold that country and its authorities to their standards, not necessarily ours, but the standards that they have in their own judicial system, to say, look, you need to undertake a proper investigation in line with your own law.
Well, I know in this particular case that the family have retained the services of a local lawyer, and I do want to just answer the point that she raised earlier in the case of Madeleine McCann and UK police going out to help with that particular case. She will appreciate that is only done when there is a request from the local police team. So we can't just send out a team of police officers without a local request. So in our travel advice, Madam Deputy Speaker, we do emphasise that we can't interfere in local processes, and we would not want to see that kind of interference in our own. We do regularly review our consular policy to make sure that we're providing the best possible service to British nationals travelling abroad, and this does sometimes lead to changes in our approach. For example, in response to recommendations from the Foreign Affairs Committee report that she refers to, and following our own internal review, we created a dedicated murder and manslaughter team in our Consular Assistance Department. It was formed in 2015, and the team has established strong relationships with the key stakeholders and partners, and these can include organisations like Victim Support, as well as police, family, liaison officers and coroners' offices. The team has also created new guidance for bereaved families, and we now have 15 country-specific leaflets that explain the requirements and the processes that families need to follow. And consular officials do receive specialised training on handling deaths abroad, and we continually work to ensure our internal guidance reflects the needs of British citizens. On average, Madam Deputy Speaker, 60 British nationals are murdered overseas every year. Since our murder and manslaughter team was established, it has provided assistance to approximately 220 families across the globe. Now, a great deal of interest has been expressed today in two particular cases, so I would like to turn to those now, if I may. The Honourable Lady, I will.
I just want to take her back very briefly to the point that she made about police and going abroad and the case of Madeleine McCann. And I'm sure she will appreciate, as will others, that it does seem somewhat random in terms of how much publicity a case may get, or how, in what circumstances police are invited abroad, and that there needs to, I certainly feel in the case of my constituents and the families of my constituents, want to know that there is an equity in how cases are investigated and how negotiations are done about police being invited abroad. Because I know the police in Scotland would very much like to go to Spain and investigate the case of Kirstie Maxwell, but they can't without that invitation. What can she and her government do to initiate those invitations and to make sure that the police forces work together, and that we can get more cases where the police in across the UK who do an excellent job can go abroad and support those families and investigate?
Well, it's hard when we're talking about specific cases to make a generalised statement, but of course what I'm saying in terms of a generalised statement is that it will always require the request of the local organisation. Of course, sometimes that can, the work that we do can involve working through Interpol or other specific examples, and the variety of these cases is so broad that effectively that really the generalised point is that the request does have to come from the local teams. So back to the specific cases that she raises, I would like to commend Kirstie's husband Adam, and they'd been married only for 7 months when she died, for his continued efforts and hers to find answers to the circumstances of her death. And throughout this time, consular officials in Spain and London have continued to provide support to the family. The Honourable Lady rightly raised the phone call that Kirstie's husband received from the Spanish police, and we have gone back and made it very clear that we have a process that we would prefer that they would follow, and spoken to the Benidorm police to ensure that it is actually local police that break the news to families back here in the UK. But I do understand the families still have concerns about how the Spanish authorities have handled the case, especially what steps the police took to compile the evidence that she presented to the courts. I hope that they're able to resolve these concerns with the help of their Spanish lawyer, who is best placed to advise them on local law. As I said earlier, we can't intervene in another country's legal affairs. I know that my Right Honourable friend, the Minister for Europe, has discussed this case with the Honourable Lady back in November, and I know that he is always willing to discuss consular cases on his patch with honourable members, as am I. Since that meeting, we have continued to raise our concerns about the case with the Spanish authorities, and our consulate in Alicante remains in contact with the family's Spanish lawyer, and we stand ready to make further representations if they don't receive a satisfactory response from the authorities. As colleagues may be aware, as I was saying earlier, the police can only get involved outside their jurisdiction if they're invited to do so. So I'm pleased to hear that the family has received additional support from a homicide consultancy, which has helped review her case. I will give way, but bearing in mind the time.
The time is running out, but you said that the Minister said that we can only intervene if we're invited to do so. But in the event that we're never invited to do so, constituents like mine, whose son died in suspicious circumstances, who went to the Thai police, who then said that they'd mislaid the autopsy, how then would the Foreign Office or our authorities involve themselves in that case? Because the Thai police are almost certainly never going to invite them to come and be involved in that circumstances.
I don't want to single out any particular countries, but of course he will be aware that legal processes around the world may not necessarily, and the Honourable Lady made this point, meet the kind of standards that we are used to in this country. Can I now turn, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the few minutes left to me, to the case, the equally sad case of Judy Pearson. And following her death, consular staff provided assistance to Ms Pearson's family and liaised with Israeli authorities about the investigation. But they have now concluded their review into the case and have decided not to take further action because they could not find a sufficient connection between criminal activity and Ms Pearson's death. I am aware that Ms Pearson's family has expressed dissatisfaction with the authorities handling the investigation. I fully understand the deep frustration at the outcome of the review. However, again, we cannot interfere in the legal processes of another country, but we will continue to work with the Israeli authorities to ensure that due processes are followed in relation to any appeal against the closure of her case. Madam Deputy Speaker, I really have so little time left that I am going to use it, Madam Deputy Speaker. The death of a loved one is devastating wherever it happens, but particularly where it happens in another country and where suspicious circumstances are apparent. We know that families are often desperate to find answers. In these cases, and indeed whenever a British national dies overseas, the consular staff of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office support those bereaved families with what I believe is compassion, dedication and tenacity, often in very difficult circumstances. We will continue to take every one of these cases extremely seriously to provide the dedicated consular assistance needed for those most in need of our help, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I very much welcome, Madam Deputy Speaker, the idea of an all-party group. That seems an extremely constructive way to move forward. I have my own opinions about how we can improve the assistance in these cases, very similar to my predecessor. I'm sure we would all want to make sure that the resources are focused on those who are most vulnerable. Secondly, that we must try to work with British citizens to ensure that they take responsibility and precautions, including getting adequate travel insurance, following the advice on the Foreign Office website, and not to engage in inherently risky activities. And the third point is that we must be very clear about prevention. And in the 1 minute that I have left, I give way to the Honourable Lady.
Thank the Right Honourable Lady for giving me very briefly. My honourable friend from Motherwell and Wishaw has a constituent whose son was killed in a road traffic accident in Ibiza, and in a bid to unfortunately smear his name, insisted on alcohol tests and blood being taken from his eyeballs in a very distressing case. And I think that whilst I hear what she says about British citizens abroad, it is important that we critique the processes in country.
Well, again, I think this would be a very helpful area for the all-party group to engage in. So, in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to congratulate once again the Honourable Lady and all Honourable Members who've raised their constituency cases. We stand ready in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to meet, obviously, with individual colleagues, and we continue to look to ways to improve our consular service.
The question is, this House do now adjourn. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.